Yeah, sorry, I put this in the wrong section before, so it may not have popped up. So we have an issue somewhere I can find, but it doesn't have much useful info, so I'll just describe it out loud. We've been talking about the operator forever and what the future is. I was wondering if folks think that it's time to move forward on this. What I was thinking tentatively is that in 1.23 we formally deprecate the operator. What that means is we go change all the wording on the docs to say, instead of this is strongly recommended against, we say this is deprecated and pending removal in a future release. We probably put out a blog post about this, which is like what's happening, why we're doing it, what you can do if you're on the operator. In addition, we build up some documentation, testing, whatever, on migrating from the operator to istio_cutl install. This is really easy to do, actually. I don't like this is not much engineering work. It's more testing and docs and whatnot. Because they're the same code base, you literally just take the in-cluster stuff and you run it offline. Or not offline, but to istio_cutl. And I've tested this a little bit and it seems to work fine. So we'll just need to document that, really. And then we can also provide alternative paths to things like Helm or Sail, the third-party operator thing. Another thing as well is we're also in parallel looking into istio_cutl to Helm migration. So in theory, you could then do istio operator to istio_cutl to Helm, or maybe even one step to Helm. I don't think that's a prerequisite to do this, but it might happen to land at the same time, which would be handy if that's where folks want to go. Then after we deprecate, at some point we need to remove. I was pitching that we deprecate in 123 and remove in 124, but we could switch that up, be a little slower, which would just give users more time. I do feel like we've been saying we've kind of informally deprecated it for a very long time, which may make it less required to give such a long window, but open to opinions there. And then I know I've been saying a lot, but one last thing, there has been some interest from some people, Tetrate, to fork off the operator and continue maintaining it, which obviously we can't stop anyone from doing that. That's perfectly fine. But there is a question of whether we do that in Istio ecosystem, what the branding is allowed to be, and whatnot there. So a few areas. Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I know that the Sail operator thing is happening, but I think we probably want to slow roll the removal, mainly because I know of multiple people in and outside of Microsoft, for what it's worth, who have somewhat ignored the warning, mainly because the idea of, we discourage it, but it's still supported. So a rapid removal would leave them vulnerable to CVEs. I think maybe a couple of releases is probably sufficient, especially if we provided that we give documentation for how to migrate to istio_cutl. I think announcing 123 or moving 125 is probably, I'd probably be okay with that.
I know we had a burn down list for announcing deprecation in 122, and we didn't announce it because that burn down list did not get completed. Is that complete now?
I don't recall seeing the list recently, so maybe I'm wrong, but my understanding from Whitney was the only thing blocking was migration path, which we do technically need to do, but given the kind of work that I've done already, it's not a lot of work. It's just some documentation testing. So I think that we can, we don't need to let that block us, even though it's not 100% done. We can make sure it's done before this happens, if that makes sense. Well, to be fair,
documentation is just taking the istio operator CRD out of the cluster and then using istio_cutl against it.
Exactly, yeah.
So do we have people willing to work on the documentation and the testing? Just making sure it's staffed to do this, I guess.
Go ahead, John.
I don't know anyone that has particularly volunteered to do it, but I would potentially do it, because the reason why I want to do this, well, there's a variety of reasons, but part of the thing that spurred this on, beyond all the issues with the operator, is that the operator is holding us back from improving Istio install. So once we remove the operator, then we can make Istio install better. And like, there's been a lot of discussion about aligning it with Helm. We can't do that because we have all this junk in it that's tied to the operator, because they have the shared code base. So I think it's quite beneficial to get this done. So we could probably find someone else as well, but I'd be willing to do it. It's a pretty small amount of work too, the docs. So.
Okay, that's good. That's an important context. I think some of us might have missed. Yeah, it's actually not just about the operator itself. It's prevent us doing enhancement work to existing Istio and Helm and bring them close together.
I think originally we had considered migrating to Helm as a blocker for deprecation, particularly, and this is a long time ago discussion, so I might be getting the details wrong, but if I recall, it was due to GitOps workflows. Istio is technically usable in GitOps, but we don't give it a lot of love. So it might be wise to either support migration to Helm as part of deprecation, or just tune up Istio GitOps. It's under the Istio repo. We publish it to GitHub or the GitHub marketplace, but it doesn't. I don't think it's like technically an official part of our release process or things like that. I wouldn't want to cut off users who have installed the operator and are now just using Helm and CRDs to upgrade Istio, and sort of leave them without a path forward.
Yeah, that's a good point. The tricky thing is, like, in order for us to get a path to, it's like a chicken and egg problem. Like, in order to reasonably get a path to Helm, we have to remove the operator so that the code is reasonable to deal with to build that migration path.
So can you help me understand the detail there? Like, we had talked about a command, and we had a poor prototype of one that just converted an Istio operator spec to a Helm values.yaml. Is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, we could do something like that. Like, you also have to do the ownership change.
Yeah, I think I saw you did that in the last release, right?
No. So I had a draft PR that, so there's kind of two phases. One, at the bare minimum, you can just apply all these labels to all the Helm objects, and kind of attach them to the release, and then install the release, and it will kind of trick Helm into thinking it's fine to control the objects. A step further is what I had a draft PR to do, which is to actually create a real Helm release under the hood. So like, if you do Helm list or whatever, it shows up there. It's fully looks like Helm installed it, because Helm's just a CLI, right? So you could, in theory, have different CLIs to do the same thing. So then you can just do Istio install Helm upgrade, and like, Helm doesn't know, it's none the wiser. And you don't even have to really, well, I guess to get your values back out, you'd probably need to do something, but I think Helm can actually get the values that were set. Like, you can do Helm show values or something. So that's one path. Now, there are cheaper paths. Like, when I said we have to remove the operator to get Helm migration, that's obviously not true. Like, it's code we can do work. It's just a lot easier to clean up the code and build in these migration paths without the legacy code. But if we feel that we have to have, I didn't really consider this a GitOps thing, that people may want to go from Istio operator to Helm. I had assumed that people using Istio operator would want to go to Istio because it's the exact same API and the migration is simple. But I agree that with GitOps, that may be somewhat more problematic. But at the same time, these GitOps people, they're deploying the operator. And how are they doing that? They're probably doing operator manifest generate. Maybe they do that with Istio as well.
So what I was, because actually the first time I think I met you, John, was me trying to figure out how to do Istio operator with Terraform. And what I was doing was, in my case, it was like a Helm install of the operator chart, and then I apply a CRD. Okay, keep a CRD in source control and apply that. Mitch, what is the workflow that you're thinking of with GitOps and the operator? And maybe we can see what the smoothest path there is, because I think I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details when you say GitOps.
So the way that operators are supposed to work, which the Istio operator never quite achieved, was to allow you to install a code base whose responsibility was to install Istio. And then from then on, when you want to make changes to Istio, like an upgrade, all you're doing is changing a CRD, which is unfortunately, we named it the same as the operator. It's called the Istio operator CRD. And theoretically, that operator could stay fairly static while the CRD changed, and you're able to keep your Istio installation up to date. What we found was that in practice, the operator had to be upgraded first. For every minor release, you upgrade the operator, then you use the CRD to upgrade the install. And it was just this sort of awkward chicken and egg kind of problem. But the ideal way to interact with an operator in Kubernetes would be I've installed the operator, and now in my Git repo, I've checked in a YAML file that represents the operator's config. In this case, whatever Istio control planes ought to be installed and configured. And when I want to install a new control plane or remove an old one or upgrade something, all I do is go to Git, I edit those YAML files, and once I check them in, the rest of that flow is automated. I'll use something like maybe Argo to write those YAMLs into Kubernetes. The operator picks them up and acts on them to install Istio. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. That's super helpful. For some reason, I was forgetting, missing the Istio lifecycle management piece. Which
Yeah,
is,
I think we all were
important.
missing that, Keith.
Yeah. Like if you want to do canaries, you have to install 2 operators, for example.
Right. Like I don't see how the operator model in general gets around, like operator for lifecycle management model gets around it.
So
Because
the only useful operators are ones where you either have one operator managing many things, which Argo, CD, and Flex are basically operators, right? They're generic Helm operators, more or less.
Right.
Or like
But
if
you
you're
don't upgrade
like
Helm itself by upgrading like Argo's not managing the version of Helm.
yeah, the versions are decoupled. So like
Right.
the Prometheus operator, for example, it can install multiple versions of Prometheus.
Interesting.
The Prometheus operator is a bit different because the value of it is not deploying Prometheus so much as it is configuring Prometheus, because it's not configured by Kubernetes resources by default.
Mhm.
So Istio is less valuable because like that operator is like a shim for Kubernetes. Istio is already Kubernetes native, so there's no shim needed. The real value for operators and why they exist, in my opinion, is because of cloud vendors that operate, well, not just cloud vendors, but Kubernetes platform vendors that operate the operators for you, which is why the Istio operator exists. It's why other operators exist. Like then there's some value because you're not operating it. If you already have to operate the operator, then it's just as much work, and it's just as much work to operate the actual thing. Like there's no value, right? But if someone else is operating it for you, then sure, like pretty easy to apply Istio operator to your cluster. So
yeah, makes sense. So that said, so basically the problem is that we've got people who are managing their Istio installs with the operator and need to now have them manage it with something else that is approximate to that workflow of, well, yeah, that's tougher.
I think the particular problem there is, let's say that we move them to Istio Cuddle install and we don't have a Helm migration path. GitOps can figure it out. We've got a way to drop Istio Cuddle into GitHub workflows. It's not too much further to imagine dropping it into an Argo environment or something along those lines.
Right.
The challenge then is that what is our next step? Well, the next step is we want to change how Istio Cuddle install works. We want to change the API. So the user just got done with one migration. Now we need to talk to them about the next migration to whatever the new version of the Istio operator spec is, hopefully just a Helm values file or something along those lines. My preference would be to give them one migration that they can jump all the way forward and not tell them again in 6 months, oh no, here's another new thing you need to account for in your environment.
Well, what if SEO cuddle? I mean, it wasn't part of that a prerequisite to the changing the API to make SEO cuddle output Helm releases? I remember that being talked about at some point.
Yeah.
Wait, so you're saying we don't have to change the API to output Helm?
I don't
That's accurate.
think.
Yeah, okay, I know, I
don't
agree.
think
I just
so.
wasn't sure I understood what you were saying correctly. Yeah, so
Yeah.
this should probably all be written up in a doc. So this very fair comments regardless. But how I had envisioned it was that we would make all these improvements under the hood of Istio Cuddle. Like in your PR, you were basically converting Istio operator to Helm. Like we essentially do that, but it's internal and the user doesn't notice, and we output Helm stuff. In parallel or later or whenever, we could also make a better API and support both of them. I don't have a lot of desire to remove the Istio operator as an input to Istio Cuddle because there's just so much usage of it. I mean, everyone that uses Istio basically uses it, right? And like all the docs and whatnot. We could do some of the smaller stuff like rename it and then just allow both names. Like that's very cheap in the code. Might be confusing from docs perspective, so I don't want to go too far off into that discussion. But changing the shape, like I think we can keep that for a while, and we can have translation layers. There's already a ton of translation from Istio operator to Helm already internally. I don't know. I feel like I rambled a bit there. Does that make sense, though?
It does make sense. I'm wondering why. Then what is the hang up as far as being able to make these improvements to Istio install today? If the API stays the same, where's the disconnect?
It's a coding issue. The code is extraordinarily complicated and abstracted, and just quite tricky to mess with because of all the constraints of the operator.
I see.
And again, like that's all. Like we could do the work. Don't get me wrong, but here was my thought process. I went to go do this Helm stuff, and I was like, "Wow, this is a huge pain. I really don't want to do this." So I just slapped some total hacky thing together that's not viable. And I was like, if we removed all this code, though, then it would be pretty easy. And hey, look, we've been talking about removing all this code for a long time. Maybe we should just do it now and get it over with, and we can move forward. It's not the only path, obviously. It's the path of least engineering resistance.
John, if we separated the code bases, basically take the current operator folder, copy and paste. The secondary one only supports Istio Cuddle, and we trim out all of the stuff that is holding us back in terms of in-cluster operator. If we're already saying the API stays the same, that seems like it gives us a path to evolve Istio Cuddle the way that we need to, prepare for smooth deprecation for our users, eventually completely delete the in-cluster operator code base. Does that seem viable to you?
I think it could be, but what I'd rather do, which is similar, is do the exact same thing, but move it out of the repo. And we already have people that are kind of signed up to do that, I think. I talked about some people were interested in maintaining the operator as a fork. One of the open questions was, what does that fork look like? We could make it semi-official and say, like, look, if you don't agree with this, you still want to use the operator. Look, it's maintained by the community. It's not officially used to it now, but there's still similar people maintaining it. You're free to use it if you'd like. I don't know, what do you think of that?
Well, it raises some very interesting questions that I'd never really considered. It's sort of a transfer of ownership. Not so much ending support as changing who supports it.
But it's definitely ending official support for it. Like we kind of did this with the add-ons a long time ago. Not as much because the add-ons were obviously developed by other people to begin with, but like we did somewhat similar there. But this is a much bigger. Like we're not like now we will not say like if someone comes to me and says I have a problem with Istio operator, now I say, well, we warned you. In the future, I'll say I don't care. Go ask the Istio operator folks. Like that's a totally different project, right?
And if it's called the tetrade operator, will you still say that?
I think so. If we were to, So I mean, I've only talked to them briefly, but they had interest in being in Istio ecosystem / Istio operator. They said the alternative, like they're going to do it no matter what, and the alternative would just be tetrate / with some name, right? So it's just like they want to do a community thing. It's just if it's not allowed for whatever reason, they will just do it on their own. I have some issues with calling it Istio operator or things that just from a confusion standpoint, like there's already a lot of confusion in the space. Like I'd want to call it like legacy operator or something. I can understand why people actively using it would not want to use something called legacy operator. So there's probably a lot of debate to be had there. But I think they would be interested in it being in Istio ecosystem. We just need to make sure that it's separated the right amount so that it's not confusing to users if we do that.
And then we'll need some sort of continuity testing to make sure the API stays compatible.
Well, not
I don't
necessarily.
think we
like,
do.
kind of,
It's more like they
like,
do.
Yeah, exactly. Like our responsibility ends. Like we say, look, the operator's done. Here's your migration paths. We have official support for Istio Cuddle. If you don't like that, there's a third-party support for what we used to have. If you don't like that, there's a new third-party one, Sail Operator. And those are your options. We only support one. You're free to do the other ones. They're supported by other people, kind of.
Wait, so the tetrate thing is different than Sail Operator?
So Sail Operator is a totally new operator from scratch.
That was the Red Hat folks, right?
That's a Red Hat folks. Yeah, I don't know if more people are collaborating, but they at least started it. It's based on the Helm charts, and I haven't looked that closely, but I think it's closer to probably what we would build if we were to build something today.
Got it.
So they're kind of, it's not like API compatible.
So it's pretty much like we've got two ecosystem options, an official option, choose your own adventure.
Yeah,
sort
like
of
two
thing.
official options technically, Istio Cuddle and Helm.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then interestingly, the two ecosystem options are operators on top of those. Istio Cuddle operator and Helm operator, more or less. So. And like I would imagine, like on our docs, like we don't document these community offerings. Like in the blog post for like it's deprecating, we mention them probably, but it's not like on our docs we'd say here's the 4 options. Like no, there's 2 options to install Istio.
So how long have we been putting out Istio operator controller as deprecated? I feel like it's been at least a year.
It's been a long time. Technically, it's never called deprecated. It's only called extremely discouraged, and it's every bad word except for the word deprecated. And the reason we did that was because people don't know what deprecated means. Usually, like technically, the definition just means that it's not recommended, but usually people interpret it to mean it's being removed or it has already been removed sometimes. So we avoided using that word. In this case, we would actually mean it is deprecated for removal in the future. So
the discouragement language was added in 2021.
Yeah, so that's a pretty long time, 3 years.
I remember specifically because that I wasn't at Microsoft at the time. I was trying to use the operator, and I remember getting halfway with my POC and then seeing this new red thing. I was like, "What the heck is happening with the operator?" I changed my POC after that. So, but I remember the exact year. It was 2021. So there's definitely been warning. How much people have heeded that warning is both out of our control and probably a lot lower than we would like. But there has been notice. There has been some level of notice or direction that we've given to the community.
Yeah, so that's why, I think, I honestly, I feel that's plenty of notification window, it's like the longest people can ask for. Now we just need to make sure there is a smooth transition path we can provide to the user to put the official deprecation notification out.
Yeah,
So
and to be honest, go ahead, Lynn.
No, I was just trying to think. I think the key question is the migration path sufficient with Istio Cuddle as the primary way to help people move? Do we need a better path?
123 launches, it ships next month.
Yeah.
I think if we do the 2 release deprecation window before removal, one that helps. I think it's more. What's the word I'm thinking of? Cognizant. It recognizes the fact that this is still widely used, even though we wouldn't like it to be. And it also gives folks time to highlight things that we might have been missing, or that are gaps in our migration guidance. But ultimately, given that we've been discouraging it for 3 years, I don't think that the migration has to be quite as smooth, as long as there is equivalent functionality, somewhat equivalent functionality somewhere. I don't think the bar is quite as high.
difficulty is that while it's been discouraged for 3 years, those who did adopt it before we started discouraging it, or for whatever reason, adopted it after we decided to discourage it, we've not provided them a path forward until now. Been like, go ahead
That is
and
true.
by hand translate your operator file. I guess to Istio Cuddle we have. That's a fairly natural path. There's some anti-patterns there in that it's not, GitOps friendly, or not especially good for like platform engineering. But sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm not sure that we've actually, like, we've told them to move on, but we've not told them how to move on.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, like one of the reasons why I'm less concerned about this than others is like if we go make a breaking change to a virtual service, for example, you might have 10,000 virtual services owned by 1,000 different teams, right? The Istio install, it's like it's just one thing. It's not like you're going to get subtle issues. Like you either install it or you don't. And so for me, breaking changes at the install path are less impactful than breaking changes to like the core product. Given the forking option where users can essentially have no change, like they literally just change where they pull the thing from. I feel less bad about the deprecation here. I actually feel like most of my concern is not on the technical side, but it's more on the perception side of
Yes.
Istio doesn't have any idea what the hell they're doing with install and keeps changing stuff. Which brings me to kind of one point. I've been thinking a lot about making something about the past, present, and future of the Istio install to kind of make sense of this. This is why I was asking about the maintainer track talk. Maybe it could make sense there. Probably also needs a blog regardless, I guess, because people don't watch talks much. Maybe that would help bring some understanding to this, both to show like, hey, look, like we did make some mistakes in the past. Here's why, like here's the context and why, and here's what we're doing to improve it, and here's how we've learned from those mistakes and stuff. So it at least gives some context on what appears to be chaos and madness.
Is there a how should I word this? I love the idea of the blog post. Is there concrete reasoning we can give for why the operator model doesn't work for Istio but works for, say, Prometheus or Cilium? Is Istio just bad at doing operators? I'm just thinking about some of the messaging of that and the questions that might pop up. Do we have great answers for those?
I have a blog post that basically, it's not technically just about that, but it answers that question, I think. So yes, I think we could expand that and make it clear why our operator is bad. That is in the admitting mistakes aspect of the blog post, not proving our competence. Our competence proving is how we're addressing it moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also what Mitch clarified early with you, John, about you have to install the new version of the operator to work with the operator is like a caveat a lot of people didn't realize.
Yes, who watches the Watchmen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, John, I think we're all in favor of moving towards deprecation. It sounds like there's a few options along the way. I'd be happy to co-author an RFC with you this week and try to get some consensus over, say, the next week, which should give us enough time to get in what changes we might need, what little changes we might need for 123. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, so let's kind of, I feel like we're all moving towards something, so let's try and write down what we all agree on. We all agree on we should deprecate in 1.23? And by deprecate, I mean we say
along the deprecation.
announce it.
Yeah.
I would say as long as there are migration paths forward. I'm not thoroughly convinced those exist sufficiently today. But I think they could exist by 123. I can dust off that
Yeah.
Helm script.
I think we should
get that
make
done.
them exist in 1.23, but even if they didn't, I think there's still value in saying that we're going to do it just to give people a warning. Obviously, the removal is blocked by the migration stuff, though.
I would push back slightly on that.
That's true. It does kind of suck to say, like, hey, we're moving in and we're building the migration. Well,
yeah, like maybe what we can do is some version of what we did with Ambient, where we say we were going to we announce the deprecation in advance, and then but we still keep the well, we have to push the removal date back a little bit. But I think the earlier we can get this out there, the better. And say, hey, 124, we're going to deprecate the operator. Why are you waiting to 124 and telling you now we don't want to officially deprecate and not going to start the clock until we have migration options for you? Here are the considerations. I can see both sides. I think we don't want to officially deprecate anything without the migration path forward. I feel strongly about that. I think there might be some value in as much advance warning as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
So then it would sound like the game plan for this week is like, let's see if we can get that tooling in place for 123. It's a little bit of a scramble, but I think it's achievable. And then if we don't, we can still announce it. We just are targeting 124. Does that sound right to you, Keith?
Is the tooling?
My understanding is the tooling already in place.
Yeah. Do we need tooling for Easter Cuddle or Helm? That's the
just
question.
Easter Cuddle, right? Because one path, I think we agree, as long as there is a path.
That's what I think. I don't know that. I'll just let Mitch speak, actually.
I would want to see how that's meant to be used in a GitOps environment. Our GitOps users are typically platform engineers. They are the most averse to changes like this. And they also represent our largest, most stable enterprise customers or users. So I want to make sure that we're providing them a path forward in particular. I don't want to punish them for having made the right decision and run their Istio install the at least somewhat the right way.
So if they're using something like, okay, I remember now. Your point is that we need to provide a quote unquote official GitHub workflow bundles for Istio Cuddle, stuff like that. Make sure there's
we have a GitHub workflow. I'd be interested in seeing how difficult would that be to package into Argo, for instance. I'm currently using Argo to upgrade Istio with the Istio operator. How difficult is it to say, okay, well now I'm going to use Istio Cuddle within Argo? I've not tried to do that before, so I can't say whether it's very difficult or trivial, but we should figure that out. I suspect it might be less work just to get that Helm conversion command finished over the next week or two than it would be to be able to package Istio Cuddle into Flux and Argo, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay. It seems like we have some disagreement there. On removal time, how are people feeling on 24 versus 25, assuming we get migration stuff?
I was hoping to look up, what have we advertised in terms of maturity for the operator? Did we leave it at alpha?
Yes.
That gives us a good deal of flexibility.
It says beta, technically.
Oh, does it
say beta?
What's the what's the API version of the CRD?
It's alpha. Technically, the beta, well, not technically, like just fully, the beta policy says features in beta may be removed with 3 months of advance notice. So it is deprecate 123, remove in 1.24. Obviously, we can do more than that, but it does meet our criteria. So
we should change that policy.
I would say in my opinion. Two releases from the point in time where we have both a migration path and the announced deprecation. 2 releases from them, I think, is plenty. We support skip version upgrades. So 1 would be a little on the fast side. Users would be a little left in the dust, but 2 seems very reasonable.
Lynn, do you have an opinion you want to note?
I mean, for a beta criteria is 3 months, so why would this be an exception require longer?
So if you're doing skip version upgrades using the Istio operator, what happens when the operator is removed from the code base on a version you don't migrate to or you don't use? Then you want to migrate to the next version up.
Yeah, so it's, in my mind, it's actually better. Like, we'll have an even better path at that point. And so there's no code. It's not like we need the operator code. Like, it's not like if we removed a feature in Istio, you'd probably want to upgrade and then switch off to the V2 version of the feature or whatever, right? This is kind of separate.
Right.
Like, you could be on Istio 1.22 today or whatever, upgrade directly to Istio 1.30 and move from operator to Helm. I mean, ignore the version skew stuff. And like, by then we'll probably have a killer migration path because it's been so long. Like, there's no need to go to a version where it's deprecated but not yet removed and then removed. You can go directly from using it to fully removed, right?
It's not clear to me how you would be able to do that. Like if you're removing the code base and we leverage that code base for the conversion command, now the conversion, the code underlying conversion is gone.
Yeah, right. That's the problem, is we don't leverage that because we're still keeping all of the logic to go from an Istio operator API into Helm charts. That still has to remain for Istio. It's only the stuff that's about running as an in-cluster controller, doing the reconciliation loops, all this stuff that's being killed.
Okay, well, I guess I'll phrase it like in terms of a user expectation.
Yeah.
If I'm a GitOps user of the Istio operator in 123, I should have a migration path at 125 to upgrade directly from 123 on Istio operator to 125 with Helm, ideally without installing 2 versions of Istio and switching back and forth between them. Ideally, just with the 125 Istio conversion command. Does that make sense?
I totally agree. That's absolutely the plan. I 100% agree. So that's why I was fine with the removal in 124, by the way, was that, like, we could, like, theoretical timeline, we decide we remove in 124. Next week, we cut the branch, we delete the operator. Then we have we have 3 months of development on Istio and Helm to make the path smooth. And that's all unburdened by all this operator cruft. And then release 1.24, we have amazing migration path. It doesn't matter that the operator is totally gone. Like, the migration path, we'll actually have a better migration path by removing it sooner, if that makes sense.
So maybe we can
I
add
think that
that
makes
to a
sense.
removal criteria. So Mitch and Keith, you guys would be more comfortable with the removal for 1.24.
I think,
but like I think we can phrase it in terms of a requirement for users.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. My only reservation with the scenario you just described, John, is we're essentially, even though there's a migration path, we're kind of forcing people to migrate. Like, there's no, in a lot of these organizations, any sort of change to production takes a long time. Well, I guess if you're doing skip version, that problem still exists, right? If you're on the latest version, let's say you're running, they're on 122 right now. So no, sorry, they're on 121 right now, which is still in support. They have a need to move, like in 124, they have a need to move for CVEs, to move off of, we'll need to get to 122, so sorry. I think the scenario still exists regardless. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. But essentially, there's a desire to migrate for CVEs, but they're also having to do the migration at the same time. There's no grace there.
Right.
That's my concern.
So if we announce today, then they have 10 months until a 1.23 goes out of support to migrate. That's a pretty long time.
That's fair.
Now, granted, they might not want to stay on 1.23 for other reasons, but I think given that it's 10 months and not, like, 3 or 6 months.
Yeah, they've got one more version with the operator. They can get to 123, and then before that's out of support, they just have to basically move up their upgrade, if they're doing skipped upgrades now, they've got to get to 123 as soon as possible. And then because the clock for them doesn't start when we release 123. It starts when they adopt 123. So if they're on 121 right now, they've got to get to 123 as soon as possible. And by the time they do that, it might be 4 months from removal, and then they've got to take care of the migration. So it's possible. It's just not the greatest.
That raises a good question, though, Keith. If they're on 122 today and they're accustomed to a skip cadence, Don, are there elements of your work in 123 that are required for that migration? So that we would say, like, you have to get to 123 in order to migrate off the operator?
So nothing I've done has landed. There's just drafts of stuff. But anything that I can think of that we would do here only involves new code. Like there's no, I don't think there's really intermediate steps that are needed. Like the way that because it's like, there's kind of 2 steps. One is you stop the operator from doing stuff. And then like you could actually do that right now. Just stop your operator and run for 6 months and things would be fine, right? As long as you're not making changes. So you stop the operator and then you now need to make something that's doing the changes when you want them. So all the code, like all the logic is really now picking up the new stuff. Like I can't imagine what you would need to do like a intermediate step to change things. If there was intermediate steps, like maybe we need to apply some special label and all the resources before you can install on Helm, I would think that's a step in the new logic. Like I could imagine, just as a high level example, if we had a direct path from operator to Helm, maybe we have a command that's like istoctl migrate to Helm, and it applies a bunch of labels to all the objects or something, and then spits out the Helm values or something like that. Like there's no change needed in the old version. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So that's good. Yeah.
Well, this will be good. This is something that's been floating out there as an idea for a very long time. I know it did ruffle a lot of feathers at Paris when I announced it at the maintainer track. There were a lot of people surprised, but I'm hoping that by saying it over and over again, by the time the actual technical thing comes out, the surprise will have worn off.
Yeah.
I do think it's really important that when we announce this in the blog and whatever, that we are very user focused. Don't talk about like when it will be removed from the code base or when the release that doesn't support it will come out. Talk about if you're on this version, you have until this date to upgrade and stay in support, and at that point you will need to migrate. Very much focused on their flows rather than ours.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a very interesting point you make, Mitch, about the fact that when you announced it at Paris, people were surprised. That warning has been on the issue operator page for a very long time, like for 3 years, as we discussed. I wonder if the lesson learned here is that even though from a technical perspective, issue operator has a lot of shortcomings, it might be the exact type of way people expect to interact with infrastructure. Because if they haven't seen the notice, that means they probably haven't been to the issue operator documentation page in a long time.
Yeah.
I think it all comes down to the naming of the resource being used to operator and used in istoctl. That has caused an insane amount of confusion over the years. And like literally, like what you just said, like when you talk about it in person, especially, you're like, oh, the istro operator's removed. Everyone that uses istoctl is like, oh shoot, I type istro operator and I pass that, and that's how I install.
Yes.
So now I'm impacted. I've seen that like weekly. It happens all the time, which is part of why it's like maybe we should rename that for istoctl, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, maybe we should clarify the wording. It's not the istro operator; it's the server-side controller.
Oh yeah, we'll need to like the
in-cluster.
The blog is going to need to be crystal clear on what exactly it is.
Yep.
I also wrote up this blog, by the way. That's I'll post it here. It's about like just trying to kind of clear up some of these confusion parts. It's obviously very complicated. Like this is our this is our API for install. It's insane.
That was well done, John. I enjoyed reading that one.
Oh yeah, I like this one as well.
It would be great if it didn't take a well done chart to explain, but it is what it is. So something like this, I mean, we maybe don't need this full. I think Craig was like working to get some of the stuff into the Istio docs, but obviously some subset of this in the blog I think would go a long way in explaining. And then we'll also have potentially a blog. I imagine like 2 blog posts. One is like announcing deprecation, and then published at the exact same time as like the past, present, and future to kind of just give some context and clarity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I think another lesson here is just that people don't read the open source docs that frequently.
That's true. I mean, if you change them, like, who's going to look unless you? It's not like they're.
I use Docker extensively, and I can't think of the last time I read their release notes. I just download the next release and keep going.
Right. That's
Yeah.
how good open source is supposed to be. They don't need to read docs.
Yeah, there's some inherent complexity in what Istio does. That's unavoidable. But in general, like, you shouldn't have to think about install. And I think as much as Operator tried, and to some respect, well, I'll let you go in a second, John. And to some respect, Operator, I think, accomplished that goal, but there are some inherent limitations in the model. But yeah, lots of learnings in general.
Okay, I think we're probably good to move off. So, John, you have a few minutes. Talk about the other stuff.
Yeah, the other thing. Let me find a link. Well, okay, so there is a Helm chart. Like, so a Helm has parent charts that can decompose as subcharts. There's been some feedback from Helm users that they don't like Istio install because it needs 4 or 5 Helm charts, and it's kind of a lot to do Helm install X, Y, Z, W. And they're like, oh, it would be great if I could just have one chart and it do everything for me. And some people will just go build their own, and yeah, or they do Argo and they do like an application set or something. I'm not an Argo expert, so maybe that's the wrong term, to kind of join these together. Now, there's reasons why so that's actually how Istio used to be installed. There's reasons why we moved to the split one, which are good reasons, but there's also valid points that I maybe don't care about all of that, and I just want the easy way to do it, which is kind of what IstioCuddle provided. So there was a chart added to offer kind of a first-class parent chart that installs all the other stuff. It's not officially published yet because it was merged after 1.22. I have some concerns about it. Specifically, at the very least, it's, as you can see, it's targeted as ambient. And I'm a little worried that maybe we don't want it to be ambient and we just want it to be Istio, or like Istio all-in-one or something, or some other name. The other question is whether we actually want to do this or not, given all the complexity and churn and install issues, and what this will mean for the next 3 years or whatever for install. So I want to make sure we got some eyes on that. We only have 5 minutes, so I don't know if we'll have time to get consensus on this call, but we should figure this out before 1.23 because it's already merged. So if we don't do anything, it's going to merge, and then we kind of can't undo it.
So the code is already in. Is there a docs? Or I guess maybe can people try it?
Yeah, there's code only
before we give feedback. Sounds like we should.
Yeah, there's only the code, no docs. And to be clear, like the code is technically 45 lines of YAML, so it's not like a insane massive thing. Like this is what users are already kind of doing themselves in some cases. This would just be providing kind of the glue out of the box for them.
I'm a little concerned. I'm torn. I like the idea of a simplified install, but I'm concerned about user expectations. Like, if you imagine the first time Istio user using a combined chart, and they want to make one change that affects the contract of base, CNI, Z-tunnel, etc. What even outside of ambient, they make one change that changes the contract between them, and that's not as clear to them because they only experienced one chart. Like I'm almost worried that removing that abstracting too much is setting incorrect user expectations for what's actually happening.
So we still keep all the separate charts, right? It's just we offer this umbrella charts. My understanding is my concern is more about too many install options again, which we had that problem in Istio.
Yeah, go back to the default chart. Back to the default
Yeah.
chart. That's also sort of deprecated, and yeah, that's a solid point as well.
Yeah, one thing that's also tricky is that so in like how you would configure values.yaml with subcharts is you do like pilot dot x equals y, right? So when we split out, the first thing like says which chart, and then the rest is the actual value. When we split them out, we retain the prefix for backwards compatibility. So now if we put them back in a parent chart, you actually would set pilot.x equals y.
Oh, that's so gross.
And we have some ideas on how to fix that, but like we haven't done those yet. So yeah.
I'm a little confused by that because values.yaml, like Helm will ignore values that don't get used in the charts, right?
But
Yes.
it's expectation. If I set pilot.env, it won't get passed through. I would have to set pilot.
Right. No.
Pilot.env.
Sorry, that's not my point. I'm simply thinking if we take their meta values from this composite chart and we just copy it for every single subchart, it should just continue to work without the need to duplicate, pilot.pilot in the master chart. You'll have values in the pilot chart that don't need to be there that are maybe for Z-tunnel. The pilot will just ignore them.
Oh, yeah. The problem is that Helm already does this scoping. So like if I say I have a subchart pilot, then anything like in order to set values for it, you have to set pilot.x. And then when it does that, it passes. So this design in Helm it's totally stupid. I don't understand how anyone, well, sorry, this is recorded. It doesn't make sense to me. Like in order to know that you're being composed, you have to like handle the fact that you're going to be composed. So there's no there's a layering inversion. So if it seems like it doesn't make sense, as far as I can tell, that's just actually because it doesn't make sense in Helm, how it's been designed. It's not designed in a way that you can take components and compose them together without them being aware that they're being composed, basically.
Gotcha. Well, it definitely sounds like we should look into it and review it.
Yeah,
I think for my part, I want to go back to like, who are the users that are asking for this and what is their use case? I've seen plenty of people ask for this on Twitter. Usually it's, hey, you advertised this ambient thing. I went to kick the tires and you told me to install 5 Helm charts. I'm fine putting out a demo Helm chart, proof of concept that has some big warning at the top. This is not suitable for production use. If on the other hand, this is like one of our major users, like Walmart, saying they want to do all of their upgrades and operation with a single chart, I want to tell them they're crazy.
Right. I think I'm totally with you, Mitch. That's why I was asking about experimental profile. This is a great thing to show it in like a demo scenario. Instead of 5 steps, you can do 1 steps. But in production environment, you still have to go back to individual charts, which is most flexible.
Yeah, maybe it goes back to something we've talked about a lot of like the samples for how to operate Istio. And you can have one that is, hey, here's how you make here's a chart or a parent chart. Here's one that is using Helm file, which if you're not familiar, it's like basically does this, like it orchestrates multiple Helm files. And we have another that's here's how you do Argo CD, which we have some thanks to Mitch. Here's how you do it with Flex. Like maybe it's just a sample and it's not a install thing.
Yeah, so basically we can provide a demo Helm file that achieve the same thing as the umbrella, the charts thing you mentioned for ambient.
I think that makes sense. And we could even put it under a different artifact registry, like Istio samples. so that it's a full Helm chart. Like you can download it to Helm and go, but when you install it, you're going to type Helm install Istio samples / quick start or something like that. It's very clearly not production grade. And when people open GitHub issues, we can kind of point them back to the very name of the thing they installed.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about publishing it as well.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that with the sample. Yeah, that would alleviate a lot of my concerns, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I got to go too. So thanks for the great discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye, Lynn. Bye, Mitch.